What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm Max Torres, and we are here to give you a preview of the Oregon Ducks versus the Eastern Washington Eagles. And to do that, I am joined by a very good friend of mine, Andrew Quinn. He is the weekend sports anchor over at Creme 2 News in Spokane, Washington. And one of the handful of teams that he covers in the Inland Northwest is the Eastern Washington Eagles. How we doing, Andrew? Thanks for being here, man.
Doing good, Max. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Obviously, I'm sure it's a kind of a rough week there in Ducks country, but yeah, I'm excited for this game this weekend, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, super amped to get this podcast knocked out. For you guys, if you have been following me for a while, Creme was actually one of the first spots I got my start in the industry. I remember I drove like an hour or two out to, I can't remember the place, but it was some 8-man football that I covered for Creme. And that was my first time behind a camera in a sports capacity. And then Andrew was one of my good buddies, from Gonzaga. So we're both Zags. So with both of our teams, overlapping here, I was excited to bring him on. But we got plenty to talk about, Andrew, because Oregon's coming off a very, very rough season opener against Georgia. We all know we don't have to harp too much on the score there, but there's plenty that we can still talk about as far as just kind of setting the stage for this game. So I wanted to get your take on Eastern Washington and kind of maybe some of the challenges that they present. So maybe we could just kind of get some of your thoughts from week one. Eastern welcomed in Tennessee State, and they were able to edge out a 36-29 win at home.
Yeah, honestly, didn't know what to expect from Eastern going into week one. I'd followed them all fall camp. I'd been in Cheney covering the team, and we didn't get much of a look at their new starting quarterback, Gunnar Talkington. He's obviously taking over for the best player in the country at the FCS level last year on offense in Eric Barrier. So Gunnar was kind of an unknown. He's an undersized guy. He's listed at 5'10" on the depth chart. He's probably a little bit smaller than that, but the Eags kind of found a way to keep him a little bit hidden from us in the media throughout fall camp. But on Saturday, he definitely showed that he's ready for this opportunity. He was simply sensational. He threw for 5 touchdowns. The offense was moving. He did have a couple of plays where he had a guy wide open and he overshot him. I would chalk that up to week one nerves, being a starter for the first time. This is a 6th-year senior, but this is a guy who walked on at Eastern Washington. So really an incredible story. But Gunnar was fantastic. He didn't turn the ball over. He made some really, really nice throws downfield, and he really did shine in his debut. On the defensive side of the ball, it was sort of a mixed bag for Eastern Washington. They started off the game, the first play of the game, Tennessee State runs a little jet sweep, little pop pass. They've got the wide receiver wrapped up in the backfield. I believe it was Zach Dobson for Tennessee State. They have him completely wrapped up for no gain, and nobody decides to bring him to the turf. And he takes off and scores a touchdown. 2 later drives in the first half, they give up big play touchdowns because they couldn't tackle. And you're kind of sitting there thinking, oh, man, the defense was supposed to be one of the strengths of this Eastern Washington team. They're very veteran on defense. But for the first half, we were a little bit shocked at the display that they had. But in the second half and towards the end of the first half, they got a little bit of a break. Tennessee State, the quarterback ran into the running back. He fumbled the ball. Defense recovers, and then Talkington led a quick touchdown drive there. Next possession, Brock Harrison, who's one of their leaders on defense, he gets a strip sack. They get another touchdown. All of a sudden, in what was a back-and-forth game, Eastern Washington had opened up a 10-point lead. Then, obviously, in the second half, we have a wacky 55-minute weather delay for lightning, and that kind of stopped their momentum right there. And then Tennessee State came back to tie the game with about 6.5 to go. And then Talkington just led a spectacular drive. I mean, I think he was 5 for 5 on the drive. He connected with Efton Chisholm, who is going to be a big matchup problem for the Ducks, I believe, on Saturday. We'll get into that a little bit later. Connected with him several times on the drive. He caught a diving touchdown pass in the corner of the end zone to put the Eagles up 36-29. And then last drive, Tennessee State had a little bit of poor clock management and ended up just kind of heaving one up into triple coverage there at the end. And Trey Weed came away with the interception to seal the game. So kind of a mixed bag for Eastern. I was very impressed with Gunnar Talkington in his first game. Obviously, he was the Big Sky Offensive Player of the Week in week 1. So definitely something the Ducks are going to have to keep an eye on. He's able to scramble. He can get out of the pocket, but certainly very impressive as a first-year starter on Saturday during week 1.
What a nice just recap. I mean, I just threw that to you and you just ran with it. And funny enough, I think I was telling you before this, or maybe I didn't, but when I was searching for highlights, your package on the game was the first thing that showed up. So I definitely had to give that a watch, and I'll see if I can find the link and then throw it in the chat so that some of the Duck fans in here can see you in action and get some more of your thoughts and see what this team looks like that they're going to be welcoming into town in Eugene in just a couple days. Just a couple of quick notes. We're still getting hit with this nice crisp heat wave on the West Coast. So I have my fan here and my fan up here. So I'm going to be muting myself when I'm not talking to try to keep the audio as good as it can be. But yeah, we're seeing some people in the comments here too in the live chat. So welcome into the live chat. If you guys are watching us live on YouTube, youtube.com/Oregon Football Max Torres is where you can find us. But Andrew, I really like your thoughts there on Gunnar Talkington. I think that's really where you want to start when you're breaking down any team, right? Is the quarterback, the most important position on the field. A bit of a unique dynamic for him because he is such a veteran, but this was his first start, I think you were saying, against Tennessee State after serving as a backup. I will say, his hometown, Battleground, Washington, that's got to be one of the coolest hometowns I've ever heard. But it looks like this is someone that the Ducks definitely can't sleep on because they didn't do a great job getting pressure on the quarterback on Stetson Bennett in week 1. And that was an issue all throughout last season. So the fact that he can just sling the ball left and right, definitely a pass-heavy attack is going to be something to keep an eye on. And when the play breaks down, it looks like he's got that veteran composure to still make something happen with his legs if he needs to.
Yeah, he certainly does. And it's something that was kind of surprising to me. And it's something, I talked to Coach Best yesterday, and we asked him if anything Gunnar did on Saturday surprised him. And he simply said no. He said, this is the Gunnar Talkington that we've had. He was just sitting behind the best player in America for the last few years. And Gage Gubrud before that, who ended up transferring to Washington State to a Power 5 school there. So Eastern Washington has been blessed with good quarterbacks over the last few years. And it looks like through week 1 that Gunnar is not going to let that tradition go by the wayside at all. I mean, obviously 1 week is not enough to kind of crown anybody or say anything really about any team or any one player. I'm sure as Ducks fans can attest after their week 1 showing, but he certainly did look poised. It didn't look like the moment was too big for him, and especially there late, it's a tie ball game, 6 minutes to go, and he showed out like a true veteran, even though it was his first real start in a real game situation for Eastern Washington. And yes, he's old, but it's also, this is his first real opportunity. So I was really impressed with Gunnar, and I think it is something that the Ducks are going to have to be wary of, especially the fact that he can be a dual threat from time to time.
Numbers from Saturday for Gunnar Talkington: 29 for 46, 348 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Only got brought down for 1 sack. But then, like you said, there he is with his legs. Had the most carries of anybody on the Eagles, 9 carries for 60 yards, averaging 6.7 yards a pop. So he's got a little bit of dual threat in his game for sure, Andrew. And I wanted to go back to a point that you mentioned about, you can't crown him after week 1, because I feel like that's that week 1 mindset, or just, taking things after 1 game is something that has been very prevalent on Oregon Twitter, certainly on my timeline. Just about, a lot of people were saying, this team doesn't deserve to be ranked. And then they fell out of the AP poll yesterday, tumbling from 11 all the way to 26, if you want to call it that, being the team that received the most votes that wasn't inside the top 25. So I think that as ugly as last week was for Oregon, I don't think, and I've had a couple stories on my site that have said as much. I don't think that you can judge Dan Lanning and you can judge this Duck team after 1 week. You certainly can't write them off. They said, Dan Lanning said after the game, all of our goals are still ahead of us, whether that be a Pac-12 title or a New Year's Six bowl, hopefully for Oregon. So I guess just from an outsider's perspective, what kind of perspective do you think you take? How do you react to Oregon's week 1 showing ahead of this game?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something I even asked Coach Best about yesterday. I said, what can you as a coach take from film that Coach Lanning and his staff is probably just going to flush and say, you know what, we're just moving on from that. Obviously Georgia is a great team. They showed it on Saturday, and they're going to be one of the best teams in the nation this year. But obviously Ducks fans expected similar from this year's team. And obviously they didn't show up on Saturday. And so I asked Coach Best, and he said basically, they're a brand new team. They're going to be instituting a new offense, a couple tweaks on defense. It was Bo Nix's first start as a Duck. And yes, he didn't look great, but then again, he was playing one of the best defenses in NCAA football this year. So I think a week 1, yes, it would have been nice to see Oregon play a little bit better than they did, even if they would have ended up losing that game. But I think week 1 overreactions are always going to be there. And it's the same thing with Eastern, Yes, the defense looked problematic from time to time, but they also stepped up. And I think if Bo was able to lead a couple of those late drives for touchdowns, maybe it would be a little bit of a different story. So I think week 1, yes, it's on paper. Yes, it's on film, but I believe it's something that Oregon coaches are probably going to flush. And I think, they're just going to move on to this week. But I definitely don't think Eastern Washington is a team that Oregon can overlook either. I think Eastern is capable. We've seen it before. They went into Oregon State a few years ago and absolutely trounced a ranked Oregon State team. Granted, that team had a Super Bowl champion and an MVP on their team in Cooper Kupp, but I really do think Eastern could give Oregon some issues if they end up getting overlooked this weekend. But I feel like Oregon is going to come out on Saturday with a lot of intensity, a lot of anger. They just dropped from 11 out of the top 25. That's almost unprecedented. So I think you're going to see a different Ducks team on Saturday, and that's something that Eastern's going to have to deal with as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Oregon's coaching staff is definitely going to want to probably flush the film since there weren't a ton of positives. We'll get into some of those in this show. But I think one kind of lens that I want to look at this game from is kind of a little bit related to last year. I was with the team when they were in Columbus, and they got that huge win over Ohio State. I know that one wasn't your favorite game of the season, Andrew, being an Ohio State fan. But they came back to Eugene after that, and a big talking point throughout the week with the previous coaching staff and this team was, how do we respond? How do we look after getting this huge win? Because then you have what a lot of people think is a cupcake matchup with Stony Brook, and they ended up winning handedly, but Stony Brook stuck around for a little bit. Ty Thompson got in the game for his most notable snaps of all last year. And I feel like it's kind of a similar deal, even though they're coming off of a massive loss, because nationally, Eastern Washington isn't viewed as a major powerhouse. I think they are at the FCS rank, but to kind of further your point, I feel like it's a team that they can't take lightly, and I don't think they're going to. The last time these two teams squared off, they had Cooper Kupp on their team, and all he did was rack up 15 catches for 246 yards and 3 touchdowns. What a duel that was, since that was also, I believe, the debut of Vernon Adams, the former Eastern Washington quarterback. So we're seeing some more connections coming into play here. But yeah, I think that Oregon's going to have to do what they can to kind of flush last week, out of their mind and just, view this as a new opportunity. And Dan Lanning kind of said as much when he was meeting with the media earlier this week, saying, I want this game to be one where we go out and kind of establish our identity on both sides of the ball, be a team that can go ahead and score points. That's obviously something we didn't see last week. First time not scoring a touchdown since 2017, and then missed tackle after missed tackle, just getting bullied around like every play, or left and right. There was something you could point to. So I feel like that's kind of the lens that I'm looking at this game through if I'm looking at it like, from an Oregon perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely going to be a game where Oregon is going to have to deal with an Eastern Washington offense that loves to throw the ball, and they like to move the ball down the field in big play form. Like, this is a team that gets plays in bunches. This isn't a team that's going to run 3 yards, 2 yards, and then you're set up 3rd and 5, and then it's like, oh, how do we get to the sticks right now? Eastern Washington likes to move the ball down the field. So there will be big play opportunities for Oregon's defense, but it's also an opportunity for Eastern to kind of catch that secondary, maybe creeping up a little bit, or maybe ball hawking in a sense, because Eastern Washington, one of the strengths of this team is their wide receiving core. They have 3 really good wide receivers. They're strong, they're good with the ball, they're veteran, they know how to run routes. And it's something that could really help the Eags on Saturday against the Ducks defense that, for all intents and purposes, was kind of a no-show on Saturday against Georgia. So obviously there's a lot of stars on that Oregon defense. Don't take anything away from them. But I think that Eastern Washington could definitely exploit some holes, which we saw on Saturday. And I think if the Ducks aren't careful, they could really be in for a duel with Eastern Washington.
Yeah, and that was one of my biggest question marks throughout the entire offseason. Not necessarily the defense, but Andrew, the secondary, because you lose a lot of production from a year ago, as we all know, with Mikael Wright. He's departed, and then DJ James transferred to Auburn. Verone McKinley III goes to the NFL, and he was really the vocal leader of that defense. So those aren't guys that are going to be easy to replace, but they bring in Christian Gonzalez, and I think you probably expected a little bit more of an impressive debut. But again, I mean, I don't want to be harping on these guys. The defense did not play great, but you can't have a much more difficult first game of the season against Georgia. So I think that, for as much as fans and college football fans in general want to criticize Oregon, it only gets better from here. You're only going up from here. But to that point, they're still going to have to figure out their rotation in the secondary. It feels like Bennett Williams is the main guy that's cemented in there along with Christian Gonzalez. We saw a lot of Triquez Bridges at corner. After being a guy that kind of flip-flopped throughout positions. We know that Demetrius Martin likes to really harp on versatility and having guys do a bunch of different things, but maybe it makes sense to have guys, hone in on maybe like one position or one role, at least in this game, kind of as a get-right game. And then you have Steve Stevens that's going to be there. He's got a guy that's been at Oregon for a long time, so see if he can make some impact at safety, as well as Jamal Hill, who hasn't really done a whole lot since that Pac-12 championship game against USC. So there's still some question marks that this Oregon defense is trying to figure out, and I think that a lot of those big questions loom in the secondary. So, some dangerous receiving options that you bring up there, Andrew, I think will be a good opportunity for this Oregon defense to really see where they're at. Just play good fundamental football, and be in your assignment in the right area. Don't have any mental lapses, but. You mentioned that there's a lot of talented guys as far as their receivers go. Can you just hit on a couple more of them and give us some more specifics about maybe who we should watch for?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to touch on it real quick. Just like you said, the fact that that Oregon is still kind of feeling out their secondary and trying to see like who's going to play where and who's going to be the tandems that they put in the backfield there on the defense. That could really cause problems. If their communication isn't good on Saturday, they could really be in for some trouble with Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington has a senior receiver on the outside. He's number 1. His name's Freddie Roberson. He's been with the program for a long time. Tall, good hands. He did fumble last week, but Tennessee State kind of made a point of trying to strip the ball away. And so you could see after that fumble that he had on the first drive of the game, he did a better job with ball security there at the end. He almost got in for a touchdown in that game. Just instead of taking it to the pylon, he went towards the end zone and got tackled at the 1-yard line. He takes it to the pylon. He's in for a touchdown. But Freddie Roberson, he's a big play guy. He's a big-bodied receiver. He'll be able to create some space, I think, on the outside against some of these Oregon corners. Another guy is Nolan Ulm. He's their big play wide receiver. He's only a sophomore, but this dude can play. I talked to Nolan yesterday, and he said, going into this game, everyone's going to talk about, how none of the players at Eastern got recruited by Oregon, and they're kind of going up against guys who people would see as more talented and bigger, stronger, faster from being in a Power 5 conference. But you know what? Nolan said he grew up playing against Seven McGee. So, these guys grew up together. They've played together at different camps and stuff. And Nolan had a touchdown. He had another big play deep down the field on Saturday. He is a big-bodied receiver. For just being a sophomore, he's a good route runner. He's fast. He's strong. And I really think he's a guy that Oregon's going to have to contend with. He's a really big, deep play threat. So you got to watch him going over the top. Gunnar was able to hit him in stride several times deep over the top. So it's not going to be an issue of Gunnar's arm strength or getting the ball to him. But Nolan's definitely going to be a guy that Oregon's going to have to contend with. And lastly, Efton Chisholm. And this is the go-to guy. This is the go-to guy on offense for Eastern. He's a little bit undersized, but, I compare him to Wes Welker. I think he sticks his foot in the ground. He makes good cuts. He's able to find pockets of space and get open. And I think he's going to be a real challenge for the Oregon defense, whether they put a nickel corner on him, whether they put some linebackers on him from time to time. I really think he's going to be a big matchup problem for Oregon on Saturday. He's the guy, number 89, I think that you need to watch out for. He was their go-to guy on third down on Saturday. He was the guy on the final drive when they needed a score to put that game away. He was the go-to guy. So Efton Chisholm is someone who I think will really put his mark on this game. And if Oregon is able to control him, they may be able to handle Eastern Washington on Saturday.
Okay, so we know some of the guys that Oregon and their defense really need to hone in on. When you were just talking about Efton there, I feel like I was kind of thinking back to Lad McConkey and how he was able to just kind of have his way with the Oregon defense, and maybe wasn't someone that was super highly regarded. I believe on the broadcast they were saying he was a former walk-on. So stars don't matter, as we all know. Once you strap up the pads and you line up across from another guy in another jersey. So I don't think that this Oregon defense should be taking anybody lightly. But I do feel like they should have a physical advantage on both sides of the ball as far as the trenches go, because that was something I wanted to talk about today. But I appreciate you kind of getting us up to speed on some of the guys that we need to watch for here with Eastern Washington. We haven't really talked about the ground game too much, aside from Gunnar Talkington, as I mentioned earlier in the show, that he led the way rushing the ball for the Eagles. But 143 yards on 32 carries, 3.9 yards a pop as a team against Tennessee State. So I think that Oregon's strength has really been running the ball or defending the run, especially with some of the pieces that they were able to bring in through the transfer portal. Maybe we could transition a little bit here just to Oregon defending the run and trying to slow down this team, because we got a pretty notable update on Monday, Andrew, that senior defensive tackle Popo Amavai would be missing the rest of the 2022 season with a foot injury. He since reported that he got surgery, and it was a successful surgery. So that's definitely a step in the right direction for him. But he was really the face of the interior defensive line along with Brandon Dorless. So because he was unable to go against Georgia, that was an injury that happened just in the days leading up to that game, from what I was told when I was talking to some people around the program, as Lanning would say, and as we say here on the Ducks Dish podcast. We saw a lot of those new pieces getting some pretty significant reps in that first game for Oregon, whether it be Jordan Riley or Casey Rogers, both of which came over from Nebraska and were coached up by Tony Tuioti over there in Lincoln. So I think that for Oregon, it's not a red flag necessarily, but it's interesting that this is a pass-heavy team, because that definitely hasn't been their strength last year. And then so far this year, Georgia pretty much did whatever they wanted on offense. So not only are we going to have pretty solid coverage and discipline from the secondary, but man, that Oregon front's going to have to get some pressure on Gunnar Talkington, because they were basically not able to get any pressure on Stetson Bennett. And then when they did, they couldn't finish the play. So then Stetson Bennett was able to, have that poise and that composure that we talk about with a veteran quarterback. And that could be the same case a little bit here with Gunnar on Saturday.
Yeah, that's a good point you make, Max. And I think Eastern, they're still trying to figure out who is going to be running the ball for them this year. They kind of mixed and matched with 4 different guys on Saturday. You know, we saw a little bit of Tuna Alta here. We saw a little bit of Devontae Smith. We saw a little bit of Micah Smith, and then we saw a little bit of Justice Jackson, and we saw a little bit of Silas Perea as well. So they're still trying to figure out who's going to run the ball. But these are some guys that can pick up yards. And if the Ducks are going to sit back and cover 3 all game long, you know, Eastern is going to run the ball and be able to get a few chunk plays from that. So I think the point you make about the front 7 needing to step up is a good one, because Eastern is going to run the ball. They're not going to throw the ball 70 times a game. You know, they will run the ball. Obviously, I didn't see a whole lot from the running backs on Saturday to make me think that it'll be a huge issue for Oregon to stop the run on Saturday, but I certainly think that Eastern will be running the ball. They do have Micah Smith is a big bodied guy. He is an NFL type running back. He's got good size for a running back. And like I said before, I was talking to Nolan Olm yesterday, and he talked about how a lot of these guys that play for Eastern Washington, you know, they see Cooper, they want to go to the NFL too. And if they want to go to the NFL, they're going to have to play against guys like Oregon. They're going to have to beat these guys if they want to go to the NFL, because there's a lot of guys on that Oregon team right now that are going to be NFL guys. So you want to talk about Oregon having a chip on their shoulder coming into this game, being ticked off about getting knocked out of the AP Top 25, having that bad taste in their mouth after getting stomped by Georgia. You know, these Eastern Washington guys are going to have a chip on their shoulder too. So these running backs are going to be running hard as well. But I think if Oregon's front 7, you know, stays strong and can handle the run like they have in previous years, I think they should be fine on that side of the ball on Saturday.
Keon Ware-Hudson is another guy worth mentioning if we're talking about defending the run and then just the trenches for Oregon on defense, because he was one of 3 defensive line starters for Oregon that was working through injury and wasn't available throughout the entirety of spring ball. So Brandon Dorles, Popo Amavai, and then Keon Ware-Hudson were all unavailable. We also already know that Popo is not going to be available, but I think Keon had a good showing in his first game back. Heck of a game to get back from injury from. But you talk about just the front 7 staying disciplined. I think that's something that we're definitely going to be looking for this week from Noah Sewell and from Justin Flo. Since that, I mean, that's one positive, is that Justin Flo stayed healthy for after that game, because I mean, we saw how well he played against Fresno State last year, and then he got hurt, and you know, Oregon fans were just wondering, well, like, you're going to play like that, and then now we don't get to see you the rest of the season. That's definitely a bummer. But he stayed healthy, so that was good. And I think that Oregon should be able to defend the run with some of the other guys that they have on the edge. You know, you have Braden Swinson, DJ Johnson, Mace Funa, Trevin Maya. They have a lot of big bodies that I think they're feeling comfortable rotating in to slow down the run. But I think that it's going to be interesting to see how Eastern Washington utilizes the run, seeing that they're such a pass-heavy team. Andrew, we had a question from one of our viewers that was for you. So I wanted to hit on that question, and then we'll go into a quick break for those listening on podcast. Gerard asks, Andrew, who on Oregon do you think the coaching staff at Eastern Washington is game planning around?
Well, I think the biggest answer to that question is Bo Nix. I mean, I think we all saw Bo play in week 1, and it was, again, kind of a mixed bag. I mean, he looked good at times, but those were very brief times. And then the interceptions, obviously, killers, like drive killers. You can't be turning the ball over. And that's one difference between Bo and Gunnar Talkington in week 1. Gunnar didn't turn the ball over, and Bo unfortunately did. And it kind of put Oregon behind the 8 ball to the point where they had to start taking some other shots and some things that maybe they didn't want to early on. But, you know, Eastern has a new defensive coordinator this year. I think that's something that is going to be, you know, something that Eastern has to figure out, because like I said, in week 1, they gave up 3 big play touchdowns, and it was because they couldn't tackle. The communication was poor. And so I think they need to keep Bo Nix moving. That is going to be the biggest key for Eastern Washington on Saturday. They need to get him off his spot. They need to get him moving and put him in a position where he has to make a decision and throw the ball down the field. I think when you saw that on Saturday, it wasn't always the right decision from Bo Nix. And I think that's something that Eastern's defense is going to have to do. They need to get pressure on Bo Nix. I think It's going to be a good matchup on the outside when it comes to receiver versus corner. Probably going to see Seven McGee matched up with Demetrius Crosby, who I believe is an NFL guy. He's a junior. He plays nasty. He's a strong guy. Talks a lot. Kind of, you could maybe relate him to Jalen Ramsey a little bit. He's a tough physical corner, and I think that whoever he ends up being matched up with is going to be a big matchup as well. So, but I really think that the biggest thing for Eastern's defense coming into Saturday is make Bo Nix leave the pocket. And if they're able to do that, let's see. Let's see if Bo Nix is able to handle that. And if he's not, Eastern could be in a position where they could shock the world and pull off an upset in Autzen on Saturday.
Yeah, Bo is definitely looking to have a stronger performance than the first game against Georgia. And Dan Lanning was asked about what he's looking for as far as improvement-wise from Bo Nix. And it really came down to just taking care of the ball, not making things more complicated than they need to be. But with your point, Andrew, what's interesting is that Bo is not a pocket quarterback. At least I wouldn't say so. So it's kind of an interesting balance that they want him to be in the pocket to a certain extent to be able to push the ball down the field. I mean, even though the interception that he threw was definitely a tough one, I was glad that he at least showed that he was bold enough to take that risk, because we didn't see that much from Anthony Brown last year. And then the DB, credit to him, just made a heck of a play. And maybe the ball could have been placed in a better spot too. Bo's not without fault there, but I thought that was a positive takeaway. So we want to see Bo in the pocket, from an Oregon perspective, I think, just to see him be able to stand upright and not have to scramble as much. But at the same time, the argument can be made, Andrew, that he's almost better outside the pocket when he's able to create and kind of improvise, but that's also where he ends up getting himself into trouble sometimes. So I think that you'll have to find a healthy balance of that. And if one's working, then just stick with that.
Exactly. And I think it's a great point you make, because if you remember watching Bo at Auburn, he was always moving. He was always running. It seemed a lot on third down. He was trying to run for first downs on his own because his wide receivers couldn't create separation. But talking yesterday to Eastern Washington, Brock Harrison said, we want to make him move. We want to put him in the position where he has to make that decision. Is he going to try and thread the ball downfield to one of his receivers, or is he going to try and run for it? And I think that, on this past Saturday, he made a couple of decisions where could have been questionable, or maybe if he makes a better throw, maybe he makes a better decision, then it works out better for Oregon. But I think that's one thing that Eastern's looking to do is, get him outside the pocket and make him make those decisions.
Yeah, one of my good buddies, I actually had him on the podcast last week to preview the Oregon-Georgia game. Brooks Austin, he runs the Fan Nation SI site covering Georgia. I was following his tweets after the game, and he was saying he was so surprised that Bo didn't run more, that there weren't that many designed QB run plays. I was looking at the stats right now, 8 carries for 37 yards. That actually led the Ducks against Georgia. So maybe we do see Bo run some more to just try to get him more involved and just add that new dynamic to the offense for Oregon to kind of try to get Eastern Washington, a little bit uncomfortable. But we're right around the halfway mark, so we're going to take a quick break for those of you listening on the podcast. But don't go anywhere. We got more Oregon versus Eastern Washington preview with my guy Andrew Quinn after this. Welcome back to the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres. We are breaking down our preview of the Oregon Ducks against the Eastern Washington Eagles. That game is set for a 5:30 p.m. kickoff in Eugene at Autzen Stadium on Pac-12 Network. It's going to be a hot one. I believe the most recent forecast said that it's supposed to be around 100 degrees at kickoff. So they also switched the color for fans from black to yellow. So a little programming update there to try to fight the heat a little bit. But I wanted to kind of get into more of the Oregon angle, Andrew. We definitely went Eastern Washington heavy, and we got a bunch of really good stuff from you in the first half of the show. We talked about Bo Nix and how he's going to play a pivotal role in the Oregon offense bouncing back. But I really feel like for this game, a lot of fans, at least for me, I would be more concerned about the defense heading into this game, just because I expected Georgia to, be able to do their thing, and I didn't expect Oregon to win last week. But for Oregon to look as, unfundamentally sound as they did, for all the missed tackles and mental errors, just looking sloppy and unprepared, I feel like that was a huge shock, not only because of the experience and production that they have returning in the front seven, but also because of the coaching staff that they assembled and Dan Lanning being a heralded defensive mind. But I say all that with, it is just one game. I'm not calling for his job. I think that's ridiculous for fans that are saying that. I've seen that a couple times about like an early hot seat for Lanning. Like, come on, we got to chill out here. But I say all that to say I was very surprised that Oregon looked as out of sorts as they did on defense last week. So I think that you really just want to be looking for sound fundamentals above all else. Make plays when you're there and don't try to do too much.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. And you just said it. I mean, Dan Lanning came in, he's a defensive guy. So you would expect his defense to have shown up a little bit better against an SEC team. And quite frankly, they just simply did not. And I think it's something that you've got to look forward to this weekend. You want to see how they show up. I've been hearing a lot about Noah Sewell and Justin Flo. I want to see how they play. You mentioned Christian Gonzalez, bringing him into the secondary. I think there's plenty of good guys on this Ducks team, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that are probably going to be NFL guys. But they didn't bring it on Saturday. That's a big game. It's against an SEC team. I get it. Stetson Bennett, he's a national champion now. But at the end of the day, I think everybody expected more from Oregon's defense. And so, to be fair, it is the first week with a new coach and new coordinators and new kind of position coaches. So I guess you can kind of give them a break on that. But I mean, especially for Ducks fans, for you guys, I think you should definitely be seeking a lot more out of your defense this week.
And I think a big part of that, there's a couple of kind of keys that I wanted to hit on here. We talked about the tackling. Sam Taimani, the nose tackle, was speaking with the media today and talking about how that they're just doing a ton of tackle drills this week because that was an area that they were way, way deficient in. I already talked about Noah Sewell and Justin Flo needing to step up. I mean, those are the guys that are kind of the heartbeat of the defense. If you've watched Justin Flo play, he just plays like he's absolutely possessed. After a good play, hitting his head and just going absolutely nuts. That's the kind of energy that the Oregon defense is going to need to captivate and then really just keep that going throughout the entire game on Saturday against the Eagles. But another huge area that they need to improve in, Andrew, is defending the perimeter. I don't feel like Georgia did anything super, super complicated, at least offensively. It was just they saw what Oregon wasn't able to do well, and they just kept exposing it time and time again. So whether that be, running outside zones or some slip screens or getting the tight ends involved, we saw Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers leave their mark on that game. I think defending the perimeter has to be a major, major point of emphasis for Oregon. And Dan Lanning also said, being able to tackle on the perimeter and blow up block destruction. But then on the offensive end, you got to do your work there too. Be able to break some tackles and keep plays alive. So I think the perimeter on both sides of the ball is somewhere that we really need to see Oregon step up against Eastern Washington. And it really feels like this is a good game for them to be able to kind of get right and find themselves and really define that Georgia game was not our team. This is how we're going to be for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to bounce back for Oregon, definitely. But as I said all along there in the first half hour, Eastern Washington's receivers on the perimeter, they're no slouches. Like, these guys are really, really solid football players, and they will hurt Oregon if given the opportunity. And I think, every team has tackling issues week one because it's the age-old question. How much do you tackle in fall camp? When do you go from shells to full pads? When do you start tackling drills and make sure that you can keep your team healthy heading into the season? So Eastern had its share of defensive miscues from not tackling on Saturday against Tennessee State. But definitely the perimeter is going to have to be on both sides, even for Eastern Washington. And I think one aspect of this that may or may not have an impact on this game is Eastern Washington has a brand new offensive coordinator as well. Jim Chapin, he had his first game there on Saturday against Tennessee State. And so it's a possibility he didn't even run out the whole playbook against Tennessee State, and he's going to have new stuff for this Oregon game that they won't even have seen on film. So I think that's another thing that Oregon's going to have to maybe prepare for the unexpected from the Eastern Washington offense. But like you said, the perimeter play is going to have to be good on both sides for both teams. And I believe that whichever team has the better perimeter play will probably win this game. Because as we know, Oregon's front seven is pretty stout. They should be able to stop the run against this Eastern Washington team. It's going to be how will they play in pass coverage against these wide receivers.
Yeah, and a big part of that, as far as just how they do in coverage, starts up front with the pass rush. We talked about it a little bit earlier today, but that pass rush really wasn't all too threatening against Georgia last week. And part of that was credit to Stetson Bennett getting the ball out very quickly, and that's something that they're going to have to look for with Gunnar Talkington. As far as just getting the ball out quickly, can they make an impact and disrupt the play? Casey Rogers was talking today about how it's important for them to get their hands up to bat down some passes. So I think that I'm looking for the Oregon front seven to just feel more comfortable, look more explosive, push that Eastern Washington offensive line back. I mean, even if you're not getting a lot of QB hurries or getting a lot of sacks, like I just want to see that. I just want to see some physicality and some sign of progress there from week 1 to week 2, because I feel like that's kind of one of the coaching adages, is that that's where you see teams grow the most sometimes, is from week 1 to week 2. And I mean, those matchups are going to be a heck of a lot easier than Georgia, not to keep dogging on Eastern Washington, but that's just the fact of the matter. Like, Oregon recruits like a, top 10 team. They're not necessarily playing like it right now, but they have those bodies. So look for Oregon to hopefully, exploit those matchup advantages. But we know that Eastern Washington can sneak up on them with some of the crafty playmakers that you mentioned. But I'm really looking for the pass rush, and I don't want to see it from just one guy. If I'm an Oregon fan or if I'm an Oregon coaching staff member, I want to see it from a bunch of different guys. I want to see Noah Sewell getting in there, causing some havoc, Justin Flo, Brandon Dorless. Those are some guys. You really want to get your key guys going, get a good game for them under their belt so they can build their confidence going forward, because things don't get easier after Eastern Washington. You get BYU next week in a really, really highly anticipated matchup.
Yeah, and I think it's something that they're going to have to get better at. They're going to have to be a better defensive team this week. And like I've said all along, I'm not expecting Eastern Washington to win this game by any means, but I do believe they could really cause issues if Oregon doesn't get after Gunnar Talkington and if they're not strong on the perimeter, because I am very high on these wide receivers at Eastern Washington. And I believe that they really can cause some problems. But one question I had for you, Max, we've talked a lot about defense, but I mean, Oregon's offense was non-existent. You didn't score a touchdown. You had one field goal on Saturday. Like, what does this offense need to do on Saturday to get back on track?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you want to kind of get your bread and butter working early. I think that Oregon's always been a run-first team, and I think that'll probably still be the case under Kenny Dillingham with his offense, but it looks like it'll be a much more balanced approach versus last year with Cristobal and Moorhead. So I think they need to get the run game going early. And for as ugly as the box score was, Oregon was able to gain some good yards on the ground against a Georgia front that is super, super stout. Excuse me, 140 yards for 4.5 yards a carry. But there was so much variety with that running back rotation that maybe they were rotating guys a little bit too much. You get a guy in a groove, you kind of want to feed the hot hand and keep him in there. So it feels like the Oregon staff is still figuring out their offensive rotation. But I think that it really starts with establishing the run, because that'll open up your whole offense. Take some risks, throwing the ball. I think that Oregon fans and Oregon as a team wants to keep stretching the field vertically. They attempted that last week, but both of those passes were picked off, unfortunately, for Oregon. So I think you want to get some of these skill guys involved, and a big part of it too, I want to see more from the tight ends. We saw them get a pretty decent amount of targets last week with Terrence Ferguson leading the way, but I think that those are some of the things that I would want to key in on from an offensive standpoint for Oregon. Establish the run, push the ball down the field, and just get your playmakers involved, because it almost felt like there were like too many people getting touches last week. So when someone started to heat up, it was like they just kind of cooled off because they didn't get a whole bunch of opportunities. But I think that's to be expected in the first week when you're still trying to figure out your rotation and who are going to be your go-to guys. But I think after 1 week, you probably have a little bit of a better feel for that. So I'm just excited to see how these opportunities are kind of doled out on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think, we kind of take it for granted with Oregon being so great for so long that you would expect them to kind of have these things already hashed out. but the fact that they're still like going through their rotations and who's going to get touches is certainly interesting. And I think you bring up an excellent point. I think running the ball and getting the tight ends involved is going to be the key to beating Eastern Washington on Saturday. I've noticed that their linebackers are young. They missed several tackles on Saturday. It's certainly, I don't want to say a point of weakness, but it's a point where it's something that other teams can take advantage of. And I think there's certainly room there for Oregon to exploit if they're able to do so. I think the defensive line for Eastern Washington is a veteran line. They've got some really good veteran players on that line that can get after the passer, that can stop the run. But once you get to that second level, I think all bets are off. We saw that last week. It'll be interesting to see if they're able to fix their tackling issues, get better communication between their young linebackers there at the second level. But I really think that if Oregon's able to break through to that second level, that could be where you find some big plays and where the Ducks can really shine on Saturday.
And maybe that's where we see more of Kenny Dillingham's offense taking hold, Andrew, is exploiting, some of those shortcomings or areas of weakness for Eastern Washington's defense, because he talked about how he's super focused on getting, one-on-one matchups, putting guys in advantageous positions, whether that be getting like Seven McGee the ball in space or, getting some of these tight ends some touches over the middle, because they were so underutilized last year that they're just chomping at the bit, as are a lot of these young wide receivers. Like Dante Thornton and Troy Franklin. They just have so many options that I feel like want to get more involved, but they just haven't really seen that volume that they need to really get a good feel for where they're at. So I think even though Oregon's wideouts are relatively young as a group, you have Chase Cota come in, you have Isaiah Crocker coming back, Chris Hudson as some of your more experienced guys. You want to get those young guys involved to just show them that it's a vote of confidence that they're going to be able to be relied on moving forward. So I think that that's kind of something else that I'm looking for. Another offensive note that is important for Oregon. We're still waiting to see if Ryan Walk is going to be able to go. He was the starting left guard for Oregon in week 1 against Georgia. He's been one of the most versatile linemen for Oregon ever since he got to Oregon. You'll remember last year he shifted around a little bit, played some center for the Ducks when Alex Forsythe, the starting center, was battling back spasms. But it looks like reports from practice today were that Walk was absent at practice. So Marcus Harper has been getting a lot of snaps in his absence, played pretty well in his, kind of, I don't want to say debut, but he said that when he spoke with reporters, it was like 1,014 days since he had contributed in a meaningful way in a game. So I think that he played pretty well against Georgia. So we're going to have to see what that offensive line rotation looks like. We know that last year they like to rotate a lot of guys, but Adrian Klum looks like he's looking for more consistency from his group this year from a personnel standpoint. And Oregon's offensive line, they've logged a whole bunch of snaps together. So I'm looking for that cohesiveness and just being on the same page. And I'm looking for that offensive line to dominate on Saturday. I think that should absolutely be the expectation for Oregon.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, you guys, especially under Mario Cristobal, definitely put a big emphasis on recruiting big offensive linemen, and it should not be an issue against a defensive line with like kind of undersized guys like they have at Eastern Washington. But I will say, they do have veteran guys on that line. Mitchell Johnson had 2 sacks on Saturday. Brock Harrison had a sack and a forced fumble. Like, they can get after the quarterback. Mitchell Johnson also had a tackle for loss. These are guys that can blow up plays in the backfield. So I would expect the offensive line for Oregon to obviously perform a lot better than Tennessee State's did. But at the same time, if they have a couple guys missing, if there's, a couple of holes, I definitely would expect Eastern Washington to try and make some plays in the backfield and try and prevent the ball from getting to that second level where they may have some issues.
Yeah, and one thing that was interesting after last week's game was Kirby Smart was asked kind of about the pass rush, and he was saying, well, I don't think it was that great. We didn't have any sacks, did we? Like, it is hard to sack Bo Nix. Like, that's something that I think is definitely going to be a positive for Oregon when they head into this game. Not only do they have a pretty strong offensive line, but if things do break down and Bo needs to improvise, he can be a pretty slippery guy when it comes to these defenders trying to bring him down. A good question here from Simeon to Big Screen. What's up with Jackson Powers Johnson? He wasn't able to go against Georgia. He's a kind of hybrid offensive line, defensive line. We're still waiting to see where he's going to be utilized. He spent most of spring ball with the defensive line, but he also got involved with the offensive line. So we're not quite sure if he's going to be available to go just yet. I think that was a little bit of a surprise last week. So we're waiting to see what's going to happen with Jackson Powers Johnson. I kind of feel like you could make the argument, since Popo is out for the season, that he's a little bit more needed on defense right now. But this is also like one of the deepest defensive lines that they've had in quite a while, with all the pieces that they added there through the transfer portal and that they had coming back. So we're going to have to see how that shakes out and how the offensive line looks. But, no sacks and a pretty decent stat game, at least running the ball. But I know that they're going to be looking to really establish themselves in this game against Eastern Washington. Starting to wind down a little bit, Andrew. We'll see if we get some questions here in the live chat before we bounce out of here. But I feel like we've hit on a lot of good things. We got a pretty good feel for Eastern Washington and kind of what they present for Oregon from a matchup standpoint. Some of the guys to keep an eye on. Definitely have a better idea why we shouldn't sleep on Eastern Washington heading into this game. But any other topics that you maybe didn't get to touch on or that you wanted to hit on before we got out of here?
Well, I think one thing that I heard yesterday at Eastern Washington pretty specifically about what was going wrong with Oregon's defense that they saw on film was the lack of communication on defense. And so I think that's something that you're really going to have to watch out for on Saturday. Will they be able to better communicate, especially in the defensive backfield, in the secondary? Like, are those guys going to be able to communicate better, pass off coverages and things like that? Because it's something that Eastern noticed on film. They found holes in that defense from that Georgia game, and it was based on a lack of communication on the back end of the defense. So, I mean, Max, is that something that you noticed in game one, and is that a possibility that could be something that they could infiltrate?
Yeah, I think that was, there were some times when it was pre-snap and guys were still talking to each other and it looked like they were kind of out of sorts. And I think that's absolutely got to be a big talking point for Oregon, a big focal point for the defense to have a better showing against Eastern Washington, because they have a lot of that talent on defense that I think is looking to really break out. And we just haven't seen them really play as a unit. Obviously that first game against Georgia is hard to judge, but I think I just want to see them, 11 hats on the ball, really playing physically, just look like a team that wants it. Because I think with that disheartening game against Georgia, they just didn't look like they were really, hungry, like they really wanted it. And I want to see that physicality that Oregon has tried to pride themselves on for a while. But I feel like from a defensive standpoint, it really hasn't been there, except for maybe Justin Flores hit on Stetson Bennett last week, which was just massive. But I think that, the communication is definitely a little bit of a concern going into this game. And maybe it's just part of the growing pains of a new scheme, new coaching staff, and some new guys being added into the fold.
True. And I think it'll definitely help being at Autzen Stadium on Saturday. I think they'll be juiced up and be ready to go. They'll have a full crowd. So I see it as they'll should be able to bounce back a little bit better from the communication issues they had down in Atlanta. But I definitely think being at home with that rowdy Ducks fan base and all the yellow in the stands should help those guys out a little bit.
Yeah, and another thing, Andrew, that I think would really help this defense kind of get some confidence and get headed in the right direction, force some turnovers, man. I mean, when we saw Noah Sewell and Justin Flo last play at Autzen Stadium together against Fresno State, it was like left and right, force fumbles. So yep. I think that's going to be huge. They didn't force any takeaways against Georgia, so they're going to have to capitalize on those opportunities. If they do get a turnover, make some points on the other end, because obviously the scoreboard was not Oregon's friend last week. Kind of have a couple of quick questions that we can use to wrap up here. Another one from Gerard. What would Eastern Washington need to have happen to steal a win in Eugene? Andrew, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. It's a lot. It's a lot that they would need. I think that I'll break it down in three key points. The first one, they need Gunnar Talkington to be the Big Sky Offensive Player of the Week again. They need him to do exactly what he did on Saturday, not turn the ball over, force his way out of sacks, be mobile, pick up yards on the ground, and then just be as efficient as he was on Saturday against Tennessee State. If he can do that, there's definitely going to be pressure put on this Oregon defense, no matter how good they are, no matter how big and strong they are. It'll definitely be a thing. On defense, they need to tackle. and they need to tackle way better than they did on Saturday if they want to win this game. It'll be interesting to see if they're able to do that. It's going to be a lot more difficult because they're going to have a lot of big bodies coming at them, a lot of strong athletes on that Oregon offense. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see if Eastern Washington can do that. And they also, of course, need to force Bo Nix to turn the ball over. There's no way they win this game if Bo Nix doesn't turn the ball over. They need to force turnovers. They need to put the ball back in their offense's hands. And if they do that, there is a chance that they could shock the world. And then special teams. Eastern is having a lot of issues kicking field goals, and they need to figure that out because especially in a game against a Power 5 team, it may be more difficult to get in the end zone than it would be against, the Montana States of the world, the Utah States, Weber States. So they're going to need to have a good game from their kicker. Right now it's Seth Harrison, but he's been very inconsistent. They might have to go in a different direction there. Really a lot of issues in the kicking game so far for Eastern Washington. We talked to Coach Bess yesterday, and he made a big point about how they kicked the extra point on that last drive. Like that's something that wasn't a given for them. So definitely need to get better in the kicking game as well if they want to have success on Saturday.
Okay, yeah. So some of those are the answers I think were expected. Forcing turnovers is always going to be big. Creating opportunities for your team that maybe weren't there previously. I know for Oregon, with their special teams, they probably saw too much of their special teams. They saw punt after punt, and then they weren't able to get off the field on third down. There was a point when Georgia had converted 7 straight drives into scoring touchdowns. So I know that Oregon's defense has to shore up on third down. And a lot of that really starts with having better play on first and second down, so you could put your opponent in difficult situations when they're not able to just kind of outmuscle you and have maybe easier plays down the line to just kind of move the chains. So I think I agree with a lot of your points. A lot of the offensive efforts obviously start with Gunnar Talkington and getting some of those weapons involved for Eastern. And the margin of error, it kind of feels like Eastern. Eastern kind of probably feels like Oregon going into the Georgia game. The margin for error isn't that big. So I think that, they're going to need the ball to go a couple of, calls to maybe go their way, or a couple of, fumbles to go their way, or get some interceptions like you were mentioning to come away with a win. One more question that I wanted to hit on here. I always like to talk about recruiting. The Ducks did get a commitment from 4-star edge rusher Blake Purchase out of Colorado last night. So that was some big news. We have the story over on Ducks Digest if you want to read that one. But Cameron Matthew asked, do you think if we have a losing season, will the recruits that are committed to Oregon stay committed? That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think for me, I don't think it's, at the point where you should be thinking about having a losing season. I think Oregon's schedule shapes up pretty nice to at least have a winning season and, be bowl eligible. But I think that, recruits, they're not always – I think sometimes people, when they're looking at recruiting, they think that they put too much stock into what the on-field product is, in the, immediacy of, this season. This is also Dan Lanning's first season. So I feel like, excuse me, I feel like it's a little bit harder to evaluate, a coach just in year one. So, I mean, if they did have a losing season, I think that some recruits would probably decommit. But right now, I really don't think that a losing season should be at the forefront of Oregon fans' minds because, like I said, the schedule only gets easier moving on from Georgia.
Yeah, I don't think it's something you need to worry about right now. And I noticed the other comments, like how much rope does Bo Nix have? I think it's way too early to be worrying about that. Obviously, on Saturday, would it have been nice to see Ty Thompson a little bit? Maybe. I definitely think so. But I think Bo Nix is the guy. He was brought in here for a reason. And I think that he will be the quarterback going forward. And I would not expect Oregon to have a losing season this year. I certainly don't think so. Yes, week 1 was bad. But yes, Georgia is very, very good. So I think as doom and gloom as it looks right now in Eugene, I definitely think there are better days ahead. But like I've said all along, they certainly can't look past the Eags on Saturday.
Yeah, just to give my 2 cents on this question, I feel like Bo is going to be the quarterback for this team. Definitely, I can understand the frustration about not seeing him not seeing a new quarterback come in when last week's game was as out of reach as it was. But, Lanning has communicated that he's going to be the quarterback. Other teammates, I think Sean Dollars was talking this week about, Bo's our quarterback, and, we believe in him. All the right things that you want to be hearing, supporting a quarterback. So I think this will be a good prove it game for Bo, just to kind of get him in a groove. I feel like Oregon should handle this game, but I could still see there being, some speed bumps, some hiccups along the way. But I think they're definitely going to look better than Georgia, better than they did against Georgia, rather. So I'm still working on my final score prediction, but I think I see Oregon probably winning by like
Max. Come
what?
on.
Do you have yours? We could do it.
I mean, for me, I think I really do. I really am a believer in Eastern Washington's offense. I think they're going to score, but Oregon's offense is just going to have a field day, I believe, on Saturday. I think it'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 59-34 final score. So Eastern will put up points. I believe a lot of that might come late. So I don't want to scare Oregon fans thinking that, oh my gosh, we're going to give up 34 points to this little school out in Cheney, Washington. But they are real. And I think it's something that Oregon's going to have to deal with. So I think it's going to be 59-34 Oregon victory on Saturday.
Okay, yeah, I'm in the same neighborhood as far as like 3 scores. I think is probably what we're gonna see the score differential being. So maybe like 42-21 or like 45-27, maybe something like that. I still need to get that story up on Ducks Digest. I've been a little bit behind today, but yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say Oregon by 3 scores. Andrew, you've been so generous with your time today. Really appreciate you hopping on and joining the show, man. Where can people find more of you if they want to learn more about the Eags and kind of just the coverage that you've been able to do so far this season?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm up here on Creme 2 here in Spokane, Washington. You can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Quinn. It's just my name with a Y at the end. I'll be posting up weekly updates on the Eags throughout the season. I also cover Washington State. So if any of you are interested in that later on in the season, I'm sure I'll be talking to Max again when Oregon comes to Pullman to take on the Cougs. So thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun. And thanks to all the guys who commented and questions, and looking forward to Saturday.
Absolutely. Well, it was a blast having you on, Andrew. If you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter at mtorresports, that name right there on your screen. If you guys are still watching on the live show, do me a quick favor. Take 2 seconds out of your day, smash the like button and smash the subscribe button. It is a tremendous help to what I'm doing covering the Oregon Ducks. And the biggest way you can support the show is by sharing it with other Duck fans, with your friends and family. Maybe take their phones and subscribe to the channel, follow the podcast. Don't do anything too crazy. But really appreciate you guys tuning in to this game. Going to be really fun to be back at Autzen this Saturday. Excited to cover that game. Make sure everyone stays hydrated, stays cool. But that'll do it for us on this episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Thank you guys for listening, taking some time out of your day to talk some ball with us. And we will see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.